What's up, everyone? Welcome to Bill Bronze and Dragons. I'm your host, Bill Bron Bafflestone. So today we're having another episode of my deep dive series. Today looking at the Dhampir. This is one of the new super cool lineages introduced in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and it's really powerful, really interesting. Can't wait to do a build with one, but it's also very mechanically complex. And so I really wanted to do an optimization video first, just to kind of plot out a roadmap so I would know what avenues, had a dead end. Because there's a lot of things that you might want to do that really end up not working too well with it. So let's jump right in and take a look and see how we can optimize the Dhampir. So the Dhampir get an array of abilities that we'll go over one by one, starting with the fact that they have the option of being small size. They don't have to be, they can be medium if you prefer, but there are some advantages and disadvantages to being small that we should talk about. One, if you're small, you can ride a medium-sized mount, and this has synergy with classes that have such an option. The Battlesmith gets a Steel Defender, the Beastmaster gets a Companion, both of which are medium, so if you're small, you can ride them. That's pretty sweet. If you're small, you can also fit into a bag of holding, which is something that you might be able to do if you're a medium-sized creature and the DM is cool with it, but he's probably going to have a pretty hard time saying that you can't fit into a bag of holding if you're small. Small characters have access to Squat Nimbleness, which is a pretty solid half feat. It gives you a +5 move bump, which has synergy with our already starting 35-foot move, plus acrobatics or athletics, and advantage to escape checks, so pretty solid feat. Small creatures are one step of size reduction away from tiny size, which has some advantages. You can squeeze into smaller spaces, you can climb into an ally's backpack, you can move yourself around with a mage hand. It can be cool, and just one potion of diminution or a reduced spell and you're tiny. It's easier to find cover when you're small. This should be pretty obvious, but especially when we're talking about some game mechanics that affect a 5-foot cube, for example, Minor Illusion or Mold Earth, you're going to have an easier time selling total cover or 3/4 cover to your DM if you're small. A couple of drawbacks to being small, however, you cannot use heavy weapons without a disadvantage penalty, and also you cannot carry medium-sized allies with you if you're using Dimension Door or Thunderstep. The Dhampir come with a fantastic 35-foot move speed, which makes them excellent at kiting. That extra 5 versus most creatures at 30 really makes a big difference. It's a game of inches, as they say in football. So the higher move speed you have, the better. You start with 35, you can combo this with static move bumps like Mobile, Longstrider, Zephyr Strike, Barbarian's Fast Movement, the Monk's Unarmed Movement, the Ranger Roving ability, the Gloomstalker's Dread Ambusher, the Bladesinger's Blade Song. Anytime you get a move bump, it's better to start at 35. And a higher base move also combos with move doubling. So things like Cunning Action, Expeditious Retreat, Haste, Psi-Powered Leap, Boots of Speed. All of these increase your speed as a factor of your base speed, so starting at 35 is awesome. And a bit of synergy with Manifest Echo as well. If you're an Echo Knight, you only lose a static 15-foot of move when you are teleport swapping with your Echo. This will extend the kiting range of your Echo. See my deep dive series video on optimizing the Echo Knight for more information about how that works. Dhampir have a Deathless Nature, so they don't need to breathe. You can combo this with Mold Earth to get a safe short or long rest, a lot like Meld into Stone or a personal tiny hut. See my deep dive series video on Meld into Stone for more info. They can breathe underwater, so this is going to be great if you ever need to operate underwater, and you honestly never know. I remember in Bill Bron Bafflestone's campaign, we just happened to encounter a well that had a water weird in it, and my paladin ally actually got dragged to the bottom of that well. But he was all good because Bill Bron Bafflestone casts water breathing on his party members every single day because it's just a 3rd level ritual, so he was all good. If that were to happen to a Dhampir, he also would be fine because of this breathing underwater thing. And Deathless Nature allows the Dhampir to survive inside a bag of holding indefinitely instead of only 10 minutes, or a portable hole or whatever. But you can combo this with your small size for a personal, always-on rope trick. Then you can combo it with the flight from a familiar or a homunculus or a summon, maybe even an invisible one like an imp, and then they can carry the bag around with you in it, and you can combo this with persistent spells by protecting your concentration. You throw out a wicked concentration spell and then climb into your bag, and then your homunculus starts flying you around. What's your enemy going to do? Not much. Dhampir also gets Spider Climb. This, I think, is probably their strongest single ability, because it gives a huge boost to ranged attacks, similar to Flight in many cases. And Flight auto wins versus 60 to 70% of all creatures in Dungeons & Dragons. So let that sink in for a minute, and we can see that having an always-on Spider Climb is amazeballs. We can combo this with pull options that can confer extra fall damage and the prone condition. Things like Grasp of Hadar, Lightning Lure, or Thorn Whip. But one thing you do need to do is talk to your DM about angles and geometry and the height to which you pull an enemy when you are pulling them at an angle. Because technically you need 10 feet of elevation in order to cause falling damage or prone. But if it's only a 10-foot pull, then technically you need to be directly above them for this to work. If you're off to the side at a 45-degree angle, for example, then the elevation for a 10-foot pull would only be 7 feet. Now, a 15-foot pull is better because that will clear a 10-foot elevation at a 45-degree angle. But if you're using a 10-foot pull, talk to the DM and find out exactly how strict he's going to be about where you can execute your pull combo. Finally, if you have Spider Climb, that means that you can teleport to any solid structure, be it the ceiling, high up on a wall, high up on a cliff, high up on a tree, high up on a tower. Anything that you can actually stick to, you can teleport there. And that's pretty sweet. Spider Climb, man, this is definitely the star of the show as far as I'm concerned. Now let's talk about the bite. Vampiric Bite is a very complicated mechanic, so we're going to look at it in pieces. First, let's take a look at some of the general considerations. It is attached to Constitution, which is lame. It is very interesting, but it is very lame, because there's no synergy with any other combat stat. You have to pay attention to Con all by itself just for the bite. It's not going to have any synergies with any other weapons. And this introduces multi-attribute dependence. The odds of you actually maxing out your Constitution on a build with a Dhampir is pretty low, even though the Con score of almost any PC is at least going to be decent. I mean, at least a 12, right? But still, if you're going to be using it offensively, you would want a high Con score, and that's going to be problematic. And you can't switch the score, rules as written, to either Dex, Intelligence, or Charisma through Martial Arts, Battle Ready, or Hex Weapon, because those specify instead of Strength or Dex, which means they wouldn't apply to the bite because it's based in Con. That said, I personally would guess that this is an oversight, because when they wrote those descriptions, there was no Con option, and had it existed, I feel like they probably would have included it. But that's just my opinion. Talk to your DM. It's your DM's opinion that counts. But I wouldn't feel guilty about asking for it. Now, the bite has that unusual bump to attacks, checks, and healing. So right away, you start thinking, let's combo this with a bag of rats. And I'll always have hit points available to bump my checks, attacks, or healing. Noting that we are limited by the hit points of the creature that we're biting. So the more hit points, the better. Now, there are other things that you can use. I actually kind of like Phantom Steed, which is a ritual. It summons a steed that has 13 hit points. Even though it does disappear upon taking damage, you can still do up to 13 damage to it and get a really nice bump. And it didn't cost you anything. No resources lost when we're talking about rituals. You can also use Animal Friendship and just take advantage of all of the animals that you encounter. You can execute Prisoners of War. Make sure that the final blow is a knockout blow so they're not actually dead. And then you can finish them off and get a little boost for it. You can use the Bag of Many Tricks and just pull out an animal when you need to start feeding. You could use a mount that has a lot of hit points. For example, the elephant, which is listed as a common mount in the player's handbook. You don't have to kill it, but you can take some of its hit points, and the elephant has 76. Also ask your DM if you can bite yourself. This is interesting because if you can, and personally I don't see any reason why you couldn't, you can basically turn hit points into attack or check bumps. And this can be awesome if you have a renewable source of temporary hit points. For example, the Eldritch Cannon Protector or Fiendish Vigor. You'll always have temporary hit points available. Or you could use a method of getting temporary hit points through rest tricking. For example, Rally or Twilight Sanctuary. See my deep dive series video on rest tricking for more info. Point being, if you can bite yourself, that's pretty sweet. Definitely ask your DM. Also, let's note that the bump to attacks and checks is of unlimited duration, So you can just bite an ally prior to a long rest to get a free instance of it, because they're just going to get those hit points back, and now you've got a bump to your next check. Although keep in mind you don't have much control over it. It applies to literally your very next roll. Can't save it, so you're going to have to manage that a little bit. But you can apply this to your initiative, which is fantastic. And in combat, you can use it to bump your grapples, your shoves, your power attacks, your counter spells, your dispel magics. And if you are casting Infernal Calling, which, spoiler alert, don't do that. Use Summon Greater Demon instead. But if you're crazy and want to use Infernal Calling, I guess a Dhampir is a little better at it than most. You can also add it to any skill check, so really a versatile ability. The Vampiric Bite has some combat synergies with Manifest Echo, which can confer to the Vampiric Bite a sort of pseudo range. And the weird thing is that it encourages people to play at under half hit points because you get advantage on the bite if you're under half hit points, which to me is just a little rider, a little Benny that will come up every now and then, but it's not something that you should seek out, where I literally saw in my research people trying to figure out the best way to stay under half hit points. I think that's silly. Don't do that. Heal up. So now let's talk about the fact that the Vampiric Bite is not magical, and we are going to want to confer magical piercing damage with it. And there are a few ways that we can do that in the game. One, there are a few spells. Alter Self will allow us to get natural weapons, which are magical, so that should synergize with Vampiric Bite. We can make our bite a magic weapon through the second level spell. This one is complicated. It depends on your DM interpretation. Rules as written, you can do it, no question. The problems come because Jeremy Crawford once said in a tweet that it doesn't affect body parts. Now note that this tweet is 5 years old, and the language of Vampiric Bite is different from other natural weapons, which say you can use these to make unarmed strikes, whereas Vampiric Bite says it counts as a simple melee weapon. So there might be a difference of intent based on the verbiage used. But that said, the bite is undeniably a body part, so if it doesn't apply to body parts, then I guess it wouldn't apply to the bite. That said, Jeremy Crawford tweets are not rules as written. These are his opinion, and frankly, I think it's kind of stupid. So I can see it going either way. It's not up to me. Ask your DM. But you might be able to use Magic Weapon to turn your Vampiric Bite magical. And the last way you can do it with a spell is if you cast Tasha's Otherworldly Guise. There are some class abilities that you can use to make the bite magical. If you are an Artificer, you can use Enhanced or Radiant Weapon. Again, depending on how the DM rules it based on the tweet above. But that would be pretty solid, and if it was Radiant Weapon, that would be pretty hilarious. I would love to see that one go down. If you are a Beast Barbarian, you get access to Bestial Soul, and that might be good enough if Form of the Beast Bite qualifies, but it's up to the DM because technically these are two different natural weapons that we are getting through two different mechanics. But come on, it's the same teeth, so I would really give my DM a funny look if he was like, nope. If you are a Forge Cleric, you can use Blessing of the Forge to make your teeth magical, again, unless the DM rules against based on the above argument for no magic weapon. If you're a Moon Druid, you'll get Primal Strike, which will make your attacks magical. Although be aware, the bite is attached to Con, and when you wild shape, you take on the Con of the form, so that will be problematic. And finally, if you are a Kensei monk, you get access to magic Kensei weapons, so that will turn your bite magical. Finally, there are a couple of magic items that will make your bite magical, the Insignia of Claws and the Eldritch Claw Tattoo. Nice pickups for a Dhampir build, but obviously I have no control over what items you get. Finally, let's talk about the Vampiric Bite in terms of synergies that will confer extra piercing damage. We want to jack the damage as high as possible with a Vampiric Bite, but there are a lot of things also that won't work with it. So I've assembled a comprehensive list. These are all of the things that we can do to improve the Vampiric Bite, not counting the previous stuff that I already mentioned that will confer magical damage, because a lot of those will add like a +1 or whatever. So there are 4 feats that you can choose to buff the bite: Charger, Piercer, Savage Attacker, and Superior Technique if you choose a battle maneuver that adds the superiority die in damage. Those feats will all add damage to your bite attack. In terms of spells, there's really not that many. Enlarge Reduce will add a D4, Hunter's Mark will add a D6, and you can get auto criticals out of any spell that causes paralysis or unconsciousness. There's a few magic items that you can get that will boost the bite damage. The Amulet of Health will take your con to 19. The Belt of Dwarvenkind gives you a bump to con, and you can take a Potion of Growth to get an additional d4. Finally, there's a stack of class abilities that you can take to buff the bite, but note that you do have to talk to your DM about which of these add the extra damage. Some of them don't explicitly state that these added damage dice are boosts to the original attack, so if you are being pedantic, some of these may not technically qualify to be applied to the bite. Specifically, Hunter's Mark, Giant Smite, Colossus Slayer, and Dread Ambusher have weird language that a DM might say, no, those don't work with a vampiric bite. Here I am assuming that they do work with it, but just a bookkeeping note, because this is D&D and how they word things is important, and your DM is the one that has to figure that out. That said, let's talk about the class abilities. If you are a Barbarian, you get Brutal Critical. The Beast Barbarian gets Form of the Beast, which has a bite, and again, it's up to your DM, as technically it's a different weapon from the vampiric bite, but come on, it's the same teeth, let's not overthink this. Sword Bard gets Blade Flourish, Valor Bard gets Combat Inspiration, Grave Cleric gets Path to the Grave, and War Cleric gets Divine Strike. Battle Masters have Battle Maneuvers. Cavalier gets Unwavering Mark, and the Champion gets Improved Critical and Superior Critical. Rune Knight gets Giant Might. The Monk gets Martial Arts and Monk Weapon, which he can use on the Vampiric Bite, which will upgrade the damage die, but it will not allow you to switch it to Dex. Rules as written, at least. Again, talk to your DM about that, because I think it's an oversight. And with Martial Arts, the Bite will proc the bonus action Unarmed Attack. If you're a Kensei, you get Deft Strike and Sharpen the Blade, as well as Magic Kensei Weapon, so that's an interesting option for a Dhampir. The Oathbreaker Paladin gets Aura of Hate. The Ranger gets Favored Foe and Foe Slayer. Gloomstalker gets Dread Ambusher. The Hunter gets Colossus Slayer. The Monster Slayer gets Slayer's Prey. The Rogue Assassin gets Assassinate and Death Strike. The Hexblade gets Hexblade's Curse, which will bump it twice with both proficiency damage and with an improved critical. And finally, the Bladesinger can add Song of Victory. So yeah, pretty complicated class, so that's why we broke it down, and I think this is going to be really helpful for doing a build. I know it's going to be helpful when I do my build here very soon. So if you like what you saw, please help me out and like, subscribe, comment, share. You can even check out the Patreon if you want to support the channel. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. This has been Build Bronze and Dragons. I'm your host, Bill Ron Bafflestone. See you next time.